Good morrow, nerds. It is I. There's a first time for everything. A lot of you watching this channel will remember your first session game mastering an RPG, with fondness if it went well, and embarrassment if it didn't. Others, meanwhile, have yet to pop your cherry, just like one of my players who's taken the plunge to start putting a group together and continue the cycle of continue the honourable tradition of entertaining your friends with 3 hours a week of die rolls and make-believe. So, to help any new GMs on their way, and to make sure my friend here doesn't totally screw up, here's my guide to learning how to GM. As someone who's been at it for almost 5 years, and who's seen 2 30+ session campaigns through from start to finish, I'll give you a basic checklist of everything you need to know, as well as a few things you didn't know you needed. This isn't so much a how to GM video as a how to learn how to GM video. So I'll be looking at things from a high level and leaving you to decide how to make your own preparations. If you'd like your first session to not suck, then sit down, buckle up, and prepare for one of the most embarrassing stories of my early GM career. But before we go any further, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications, as this will improve your GM skills by up to 9.1%. I can't prove this claim, but I am the GM, I have absolute power, and so I'm saying it anyway. Part 1. Know thy game. The first thing you need to do for your first session is to pick a tabletop RPG and learn the rules inside out. If you've already been a player before, then I suggest you stick with whichever system you've played the most. However, don't assume you know the rules already. A lot of players will learn all the rules that apply to their character and nothing else. I mean, some don't even learn that much, but they can't be helped. If you haven't played an RPG before, then I suggest you go for D&D 5e, Cyberpunk Red, Apocalypse World, Call of Cthulhu, or Savage Worlds, as all of these are popular games with easy-ish rules to learn. Either way, you need to understand as much about the following key topics as you can. 1. Core mechanics. So all the basic rules, like skill checks, that you'll be using all the time. 2. Player abilities. In D&D, this means you need to know all 12 classes. In Apocalypse World, you need to roughly understand each archetype. And in Savage Worlds, you need to know what edges and hindrances are, and roughly what they do. You don't need to have every ability memorized, but if a player asks about something on their sheet, you should either be able to give them a one-sentence answer, or be able to tell them where in the book they can find something more detailed. That's it. 3. Combat and other core systems. Combat is the most obvious one, as almost every tabletop RPG has some sort of combat system more complex than a mere skill check. However, some RPGs have extra subsystems, like the social combat rules in Savage Worlds, or the chase rules in Call of Cthulhu. Make sure you know the systems exist, and roughly how they work. Again, that's about all you need. 4. GM-specific rules. The amount of these you have to learn will vary wildly. Masters of Ceremonies, the Apocalypse World version of a GM, don't make any dice rolls, and play by totally different rules to the players. D&D 5e, meanwhile, has an entire Dungeon Master's Guide. That's basically just magic items and rules for hypothermia, plus some useless fluff nobody really reads. You probably don't need to buy it, although I personally did. That said, you will need to know the following: how experience works, how loot works, how encounter maths work, how to read NPC stat blocks, and of course all of these things vary wildly by system, so yep, just pick one and learn that one fully. 5. GM best practices. This stuff is mostly system neutral and covers everything from planning a campaign to how to do improv at the table, to how to deal with toxic players, to how to argue on Reddit about whether GMs should fudge die rolls or not. However, you actually don't need to know everything. Here's some stuff you can ignore if you're too lazy or just don't have time. 1. Non-essential game systems. Some game subsystems just won't be used by many players, so they aren't worth your time. The most obvious example, net running from Cyberpunk Red, While the rules are much simpler than they were in past editions, there's only one role that uses them, and you have every right as a GM to ban netrunners as a role from your game. Likewise, Savage Worlds has a bunch of rules for fantasy races like elves and dwarves, but if you're using it for a sci-fi game, then you won't need to learn them. 2. Anything in a supplement. Most RPGs with any level of commercial success have supplements with more weapons, more spells, more rules, more everything. You can use the stuff if you want, but again, you're the GM, you can just say core rules only, and leave it at that. You can also say core rules for the first few sessions, and then see about changing your mind. Like I said, it's up to you. When it comes to how you learn rules, at some point you'll need to sit your ass down and read the rules yourself. It's boring, but you should do it from cover to cover at least once. However, there are other ways to learn. First, trying out the RPG as a player will give you a solid grounding in the rules. Likewise, YouTube is filled to bursting with videos about how to GM. I once spent about 6 months watching every GM advice video I could find on the internet before I ever sat down for my first session. Option 3 is a hybrid of the first two, watching actual plays. I'm not gonna lie, watching other people play RPGs bores me to tears, but every now and then I do watch them for a system that I'm learning, so I can see how the rules actually handle in play. Word of warning, it's almost inevitable that sooner or later you'll find a rule you don't like. I cannot state this enough. Do not change the rules yet. You know not the forces with which you meddle. Wait until you've done 3 to 5 sessions of actual real-life GMing, then take a red pen to your rulebook and change anything that you like. As Picasso once said, learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. The reason I say you need to learn all this stuff is simple. The more you can prepare now, the less freaking out you'll have to do at the table later. Especially as a new GM, sooner or later, you are going to run into a question you don't know the answer to, a weird fringe ruling you need to make, a problem at the table that you don't know how to handle, or even that one rule you keep forgetting and just keep needing to look up. If you've prepared though, you've done your studying, you can just go ahead and say, hey, I know this, here's what I need to do, and then just do it. Simple. The fewer of these incidents that you have, the smoother your GM learning curve will be. So yeah, do your prep now of the game, and you will thank me later. Part 2. Know thy session. Step 1 of prepping published material is to find published material to prep. If you're lucky, you're playing a game like Call of Cthulhu, or Cyberpunk Red, or Conan 2D20, with an adventure at the back of the book. Or even a quick start guide for free with its own adventure, again at the back. If not, you need to look farther afield. For official material, go to your local gaming store or visit the publisher's website. I also recommend One Bookshelf and their various portfolio of websites. Which you use depends on what system you're using. DriveThruRPG is the largest RPG ebook store by far, and has PDFs for basically everything, including official published adventures. However, One Bookshelf also has a number of sister sites. The most famous one is DM's Guild, which is intended to host community content for D&D 5e. And there are other similar sites for Call of Cthulhu, Traveller, and other trad RPGs. There are other sites, of course. D&D Beyond is actually a good place to get digital copies of D&D adventures, and I've used it myself for years and years. Virtual tabletops like Roll20 have marketplaces for official and fan-made content, and you can find all manner of things on Reddit, Discord, and other such places. Oh, and there's always the high seas. Step 1 of prepping published material is to find published material to prep. If you're lucky, you're playing a game like Call of Cthulhu, or Cyberpunk Red, or Conan 2D20, with an adventure at the back of the book. Or even a quick start guide for free with its own adventure, again at the back. If not, you need to look farther afield. For official material, go to your local gaming store or visit the publisher's website. I also recommend One Bookshelf and their various portfolio of websites. Which you use depends on what system you're using. Drive-Thru RPG is the largest RPG ebook store by far, and has PDFs for basically everything, including official published adventures. However, One Bookshelf also has a number of sister sites. The most famous one is DM's Guild, which is intended to host community content for D&D 5e. And there are other similar sites for Call of Cthulhu, Traveller, and other trad RPGs. There are other sites, of course. D&D Beyond is actually a good place to get digital copies of D&D adventures, and I've used it myself for years and years. Virtual tabletops like Roll20 have marketplaces for official and fan-made content, and you can find all manner of things on Reddit, Discord, and other such places. Oh, and there's always the high seas. Now that you know where to find published material, what should you pick? First, you should really only pick adventures advertised for new players, and even better, for new GMs. When I started GMing, the adventure I picked was tailored for new players, but definitely not for new GMs. If you're wondering, it was Curse of Strahd, the best adventure Wizards of the Coast has ever put out for this edition of D&D, and according to some people, the only good one. And yeah, I do recommend it, but it is certainly GMing on hard mode, but I learned a hell of a lot from it. Next, you might want to consider price. Forking out $30 for a D&D adventure isn't possible for everyone. And even other publishers still charge, $15-20 for a PDF. If money is tight, then third party is your friend. There's decent material on, say, the DM's Guild that's either free or dirt cheap. Finally, pick something that just sounds fun to you. Something you're excited to play. I first encountered Curse of Strahd in an Australian gaming store in 2016. I didn't buy it for another 2 years, but it just sat there in the back of my mind, brewing and brewing until I finally took the plunge and bought it. The rest, as they say, is history. Once you have your adventure, how do you prep it? At minimum, you need to read the whole thing from cover to cover at least once and preferably twice. This still applies for 30-session long-form campaigns like Curse of Strahd. I read it 1.5 times before running it, and I would have read it a full twice, but scheduling got the better of me. But wait, there's more. Not everything you need is in the adventure, as it may only have some of the NPC stat blocks that you need. For D&D 5e, these can be found in the Monster Manual, the DM half of the free starter rules, though not all stat blocks are in there, and all over the internet and app stores through a variety of third-party B-Series services. For Call of Cthulhu, Cyberpunk Red, and most single-book RPG systems, the NPC stat blocks will all be in the back of the core book, plus a few in supplements, but use those at your leisure. Either make a note of the page number that you need, or better yet, copy up these stat blocks in full into your notes. As I got more experience in GMing, I used the time that I spent copying stats up to edit them in places. But I don't recommend you do that until you actually get real-world experience of how the game plays. Another thing to write up in notes is whatever the adventure setup is. It's good to have to hand. As for how you record your notes, use a paper notebook or a digital service or whatever you want really. D&D Beyond has its own inbuilt note-taking tool, but I'll admit I've never used it. Personally, I have one section of notes for session prep, one section for mid-session notes, and one for NPCs. If I'm running a full campaign rather than a one-shot, I have note sections for the PCs, for world building, and for house rules. You might not need that much, but note-taking and session prep are easiest to learn when you're starting out than when you're already 2 years in. Finally, if your adventure has any handouts, prepare them before the session. For the haunting, psst, watch my review. I just took the handouts that appeared in the Quick Start PDF thing, screenshotted them, and saved them all in a folder to send to my players via Discord. There are also much nicer third-party versions of all of the handouts for that adventure, but I had all of 2 hours to do my prep and there just wasn't time for fancy pants third-party stuff. Yeah, that's right, I prepped the haunting in 2 hours. I know all of this sounds laborious and time-consuming, but you really can do it in an afternoon if you need to. But what if you're doing a homebrew session? Let's make this quick. Whether you're doing a one-shot or a full campaign, you should only ever prepare 1 or 2 sessions ahead at any given time. It makes it easier to adapt your story to what's actually happening at the table rather than just railroading your players into your grand master plan that probably isn't even that grand. As for what that session should be, that's up to you. There are a ton of adventure creation tools out there. Cyberpunk Red has its scripting the game section in the GM chapter, though I'll admit I've not even read that thing. Kevin Crawford created plenty of adventure and world-building toolkits that are thinly disguised as RPGs, and some, like Walter.Number, Stars.Number, and Godbound, are actually available for free. I suggest you do use some sort of random table adventure generator thing to help you. You can use ChatGPT, but when you need to flesh out the details, you are still going to need those tables. The other thing to do is to either read some published materials, even if you never run them, and or watch some actual plays, so that you know what an actual RPG adventure should look like. RPG adventures aren't really like literary novels or film scripts, so don't assume that storytelling skills from one medium will apply neatly to the other. And their exact structure varies wildly, from a list of dungeon rooms with traps, encounters, and loot, to investigative scenarios with linked webs of clues, to sandbox adventures with a vague environment and an even vaguer goal for you to achieve in them. Leave the end of the adventures as vague as possible, and don't think too hard about how to overcome the challenges you throw at the players. Leave coming up with solutions to them. Finally, don't plan the ending much beyond the payout, and maybe a few other details. The most important principle when writing your own material is to leave room for things to happen in-game. Don't have a chronological list of events to railroad your players through. Instead, think of ways your players might go through them out of order, or actively write branching paths into your notes. Don't prescribe that to unlock the secret door, the PCs have to pass a single perception check to find the key, and if they fail, the entire adventure grinds to a halt. First, allow the players to use other means to get through. Maybe they can crowbar the door open. Maybe there's another way around that's more circuitous and dangerous. Maybe the secret door shouldn't even have a lock at all. Don't expect the PCs to either love or hate an NPC. And don't expect that just because they hate an NPC that they'll try to kill them. If the PCs can RP and converse with this NPC, then open the door to diplomacy. It might be difficult to persuade that NPC, but it should always be possible. Likewise, give the NPCs a damn good reason to work with your allied NPCs more than just, well, they're allies, of course the PCs will like them. My PCs have fought duels with allied NPCs before, both friendly duels and not so friendly duels. Don't let their opinion of your NPCs interfere with your plan. Give them reasons to work with them or to work against them. I don't know how many different ways I can say, leave your prep open for what happens in play, but leave your prep open for what happens in play. One last consideration that applies whether you're doing a one-shot or a campaign, published or homebrew, is the player characters. Your two options here are character creation and pre-generation. Many RPGs provide sample pre-gen characters for your use, either in the core rulebook or on the publisher's website. Conan 2D20 has 30 pages of pre-generated characters in the back of the book. So many that reviewers have genuinely complained about it being excessive. Well, D&D 5e has downloadable pre-generated characters on the website, which are statted out for every level from 1 through to 10. Sometimes published adventures will have their own sets of recommended pre-gens. The Haunting, for example, had 4 of them, of which I used 3 for my game. I recommend using pre-gens for one-shot games, as character creation will just eat up time that you should really be spending playing. If you go this route, pick a number of pre-generated characters or make them yourself using the character creation rules, and make a number equal to the number of players plus 1. At the start of the game, give the players a 1-sentence description of each character, but don't give them the sheets just yet. Let them pick characters amongst themselves, and then give them the sheets. Hold one sheet in reserve to use as a backup character and even as a companion NPC. If it should happen that a player happens to lose their character during the game, then you'll have a backup character ready to sort in and keep them in the action. If you go for character creation, you have 2 options. Ask your players to make PCs ahead of time, or do something like a session 0. I'll discuss these later on. I never do the first option, as there's no guarantee that players will A, actually get their sheets done on time, and B, will get their sheets done correctly, at least not without supervision. So yeah, I almost never let players make their characters by themselves, unless they're replacing a dead PC and they've played the system long enough for me to trust them. One detail you should consider is you might want to restrict player options. You might, for instance, want to say no netrunners. I keep bringing up no netrunners. I don't actually hate netrunners. I've played a netrunner. Netrunners are fun, but they're also superfluous. But yeah, like I said, you may want to say no netrunners to save yourself learning how netrunning works in Cyberpunk Red. Or you might want to say, player's handbook only for D&D 5e if you don't want to buy Xanathars to look up that one spell to make sure that it actually does what your player says it does. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Sometimes it's just best not to find out. Don't be arbitrary with these restrictions, and ideally have as few of them as possible. But if you do end up using them, don't beat yourself up over it. Which options you pick, pre-gens or character creation, make sure you have communicated this to your players well in advance to avoid any confusion. Honestly, preparing your session will be one of the toughest things that you have to do. Well, until you actually have to run that session, but that's a whole nother matter. It can take anywhere from a few hours for published material to a couple of weeks for homebrew. Don't spend any more time than you absolutely need to, as doing so is one of the number one pitfalls that new GMs fall into. They get bogged down in world building or writing their big epic storyline. If they're prepping something in homebrew and it just takes so long, they lose track of what they're doing and it never ends up materializing. Or if it's published, they get intimidated or bored and they pause their prep and then just never pick it back up. The cold hard truth is the only way to get prep done is to persevere through it. Keep going, keep going, keep going at it until you finish. You'll get there in the end, I promise. Part 3. Know Thyself. You've picked your game and you've picked what you're playing. But you have some last minute housekeeping to do before the big day. First, spare a moment for your GM style. I put D&D's alignment chart up on slide because it's actually a nice proxy for the different ways that people GM. Lawful GMs play by the rules. They do everything by the book, rules as written. Chaotic GMs are the opposite. They add to, change, or just straight up ignore rules as of when it suits them. Good GMs are helpful and supportive, facilitating the player's actions and focusing on things like shared storytelling and building a joyful, pleasant experience. Evil GMs throw everything they can at the players and turn their games into a struggle for survival. And you know what? I, for one, am a proud, lawful evil GM. Something that will be of no surprise to any of my players. But you don't have to be. If you're a free-spirited fuck the rules type, go chaotic. I will always caution though that being lawful for at least the first few sessions is the easiest way to learn a system, but I've seen plenty of chaotic GMs who've managed to figure things out on their own as well. Also, do be flexible about your GM style. I always tell evil GMs to give their players a reprieve now and then, so they don't get jaded and burned out. Better to let them get their hopes back so you can crush them all over again. And even good GMs need a little evil in them to stop things from getting too easy and potentially a bit stale. This is just a simple framing device to help you think more deliberately about the way that you GM. Just give it a minute or two of thinking and be on your way. There are some more practical matters we need to discuss though. Something I've avoided discussing until now is whether to play online or in person. I and almost every GM who learned their craft before the pandemic did our first sessions in person, and there are plenty of benefits to that. The atmosphere is far stronger, you can eat snacks while you play, and you get to use real dice. You will need to buy them first though. If you're playing something like Apocalypse World, Burning Wheel, or Traveller that only use 6-sided dice, then you can pick some out of a board game box and just use those. If you're playing D&D and need 6 types of die, including 6-sided dice but also 4, 8, 10, 12 and 20-siders, then it's time to do some shopping. Note that as GM, you may be expected to provide dice for your players, especially if they're new and don't have any of their own, so always have some spares. Moreover, if you want to use a battle map for combat, you'll need to provide miniatures as well as whatever whiteboard or playmat or whatever thing you use to put them on. Playing online, meanwhile, is a lot more focused. There are fewer distractions, and you can play with people all over the world, which means if you're somewhere small without a big RPG scene, this might be the best option for you. If you do play online though, you will need a virtual tabletop, something like Roll20, Foundry, or Fantasy Grounds, or even just a Discord dice bot. And you should take some time to familiarize yourself with how those systems work, both for players and for GMs. You should familiarize yourself with the player stuff because you will need to teach it. Beyond that, you should also consider whether you want to do things as video or voice calls, or if you want to do play-by-post. I have never done play-by-post. I have it in voice chat groups where two people have in separate groups done play-by-post for differing reasons. I don't enjoy it personally. I do prefer voice or video. It's up to you. Figure this out for yourself. And again, make sure you have everything technical sussed out ahead of time, because anything you can do to minimize stress, you should do. Now for something controversial. Should you roll in the open or roll in secret? Or to put this another way, should you or should you not fudge die rolls? I have my opinions on this matter, but I'll give you the steelman positions for both sides first. Rolling in the open. It's the easiest logistically, as you don't need a GM screen to hide your dice behind. It gives the players more faith, not only in your rolls, but also in the world as a whole. It can be less stressful, as you don't need to worry about being caught out. It also helps keep you as a person more honest. Rolling in secret. It creates an aura of power and mystery around you as the GM. It makes it harder for players to guess the stats of your NPCs. And it can be less stressful as it prevents a few unlucky die rolls from derailing the entire session. As such, it gives you as a GM more control over the narrative. So, here's my personal take. You as the GM have every right to roll in secret, and any player or GM saying otherwise can take a hike. If you're new to GMing, it gives you a much needed safety net. And, I've rolled in secret in the past, including, yes, having fudge die rolls. But nowadays, I roll pretty much every single roll in the open. I do feel that rolling in the open is more ethical, and when I do play, I do prefer if my GM also rolls in the open, but again, it is their call. Given that I am a bit of a sadistic GM, I want my die rolls to be beyond reproach, because nothing else about the game will be. That said, I've been on both sides of the fence here, so it really is up to you. So yeah, every GM does it differently. Some people, players and GMs alike, will over-idolize one person's GM style, either someone they know or an actual player. It's from the second category that this phenomenon gets its name, the Matt Mercer effect, after the long-running lead GM for the massively popular Critical Role. You don't need to copy Matt, nor do you need to copy the GM style of that one guy you've been playing under for the last year. In fact, chances are there is something that they do badly that you could do better. And even if they are somehow perfect, with no flaws whatsoever, trying to force yourself into another person's mold means that you will only ever be the second best them and not the first best you. So, go ahead. Go with what feels most natural to you. And if there are any issues with your style, find the fix that is itself the best fit for you. GM techniques are so varied and diverse that you can find a solution to just about any problem. All of this comes together to say that you can GM in a variety of ways. A lot of the finer points of technique are things that you should consider ahead of time, but do be prepared to change. You will find some things that work for you and some things that don't. Try whatever you can, keep whatever you want. It's really that simple. Part 4. The moment of truth. So, you've done all the prep you can. You've picked what you're running, and you've prepped it to high heaven. And you've prepared yourself mentally. Now, it's the moment of truth. Here's how to survive your first session. There are two types of first sessions. For one-shots and sometimes the start of campaigns, you'll jump straight into play. For campaigns though, you may want to start with Session 0. So, what is a Session 0? Session 0 is where you take an entire game session and dedicate it to group character creation, as well as communicate any important information to your players that they might need to know. This is a great way of making characters, and I've used it in every single campaign that I've ever run. It gives you a chance to introduce the campaign and the game world to your players. It gives players a chance to strategize and divide the various party roles among themselves, and avoid either missing a key niche or doubling up. And it gives you a chance to make sure that they aren't screwing up. Finally, if you're playing with strangers, it gives you all a chance to just meet and get to know each other. The first question that I actually always ask at the start of every session 0 is I go around the table and ask everyone to give a quick rundown of their RPG experience. Furthermore, this is your chance to familiarize your players with everything they'll need to know for the sessions ahead. Hey, this campaign will have a lot of undead, so if you want to play Ranger, don't pick Fae as your favorite enemy. Hey, this cyberpunk campaign will be taking place in a bumfuck nowhere reclaimer town in the California desert, so your characters won't have internet access really at all. If you get through character creation quickly enough, something that has only happened to me once, then you might get an hour or two of gaming done as well. Have first session stuff prep just in case, but don't expect to be using it. Cyberpunk Red, for instance, usually takes at least 2 hours to make a character, and when you're dealing with 5 character creations all at once, that turns into 3 or even 4 hours pretty damn fast. Honestly, picking gear for that system takes so long that I usually make people do it after the session in their own time. So yeah, while it's a slow process and you do sacrifice 1 session of potential playtime, session 0 is well worth the effort. But not everyone has time for session 0, especially for one-shots. Sometimes you just gotta jump right in. And if you do opt for a session 0, you're going to start playing the actual game sooner or later. And that will be when all hell breaks loose. It's true. Almost every GM's first session is a mess. You will make mistakes. You will go blank and forget a really basic rule. The best laid schemes of mice and men often go awry. But you don't have to end your first session like Lenny ended that story. In fact, I'd prefer that you didn't. You can get your farm with the alfalfa and the rabbits. My own first session was really just an hour and a half at the end of session 0, where the players were given the quest hook, got put to 0 hit points by a random encounter berserker that really shouldn't have been there, took a short rest since they didn't have a healer in the party, and then fought a hard scrabble combat against an animated armor in a creepy house. I was nervous, my descriptions were clunky, and that encounter, as I said, should not have been there. It didn't need to be there. I added it myself and I should not have done that. Also, the Berserker does 1d12 plus 3 slashing damage with its great axe, not 2d12 plus 3, as the third-party bestiary app I used told me. So yeah, that thing had to go in the trash as well. At least my players both passed their death saves and there were no deaths in the first session. But speaking of deaths, those snafus from session 1 would pale in comparison to the massive mistake I made in session 2. To explain that 3-hour embarrassment though, I need to spoil the Death House add-on adventure for Curse of Strahd. If you don't want spoilers then, skip forward about 3 or 4 minutes. So, in the 7 days from session 1 to session 2, I lost 1 player and gained 2 more. That said, I did keep around the quitting player's Warlock as a backup NPC. So we began session 2 with 3 players and 4 characters, all at level 1. Now, I began the session by slotting in the 2 new PCs, easily enough. The party fought a broomstick and a spectre, and it was a great time. After much exploration, they found their way to the Death House attic, and to the secret stairway that leads all the way down to the basement. The first encounter they ran into was 4 ghouls. I would say that a fight ensued, but that's not true. It wasn't a fight, it was a slaughter. 2 PCs, the ones belonging to the 2 new players, were both killed. A third PC, the one belonging to the only player to attend both Session 1 and Session 2, went to 0 hit points, but miraculously passed all his death saves, and woke up a few hours later. Only the now NPC Warlock survived, and even then only because of some rather obviously fudged die rolls on my part. I will say though, the 2 new players took their characters dying like absolute champs, and made new characters right away. I, on the other hand, was crestfallen and trying to figure out how the flying fuck this just happened. After a few minutes of searching, trying to understand why the adventure would put 4 CR1 ghouls against 4 level 1 adventurers. Bear in mind, according to D&D 5e's encounter balance rules, 1 ghoul is a medium encounter for 4 first level adventurers, and 2 is deadly. 4 is just pure bloody overkill. Then I realized what happened. The designers didn't intend for 4 first level PCs to fight 4 ghouls. They intended for 4 second level PCs to fight 4 ghouls. I was supposed to level the characters up when they found the secret staircase. I missed that line though in the heat of gameplay, so I didn't level them up at all. And so it was, after giving myself a good solid slap in the face and apologizing profusely to my players, I told them all to level up and just kept on trucking until the end of the session. I also decided to conveniently remove combats with a mimic and 2 ghasts as recompense. Trust me, the state they were in, they needed all the respite they could get. But I actually went a step further. From then on, whenever a level up was close at hand, I put a reminder for myself at the top of my session prep notes in 30-point font, bold, underlined, reminding me that a level up was imminent and what the conditions for that level up would be. And tell you what, I never forgot a level up for the rest of that campaign. I tell you this story not because I have a fetish for embarrassing myself, but because I want you to understand that no matter how bad things get, no matter how catastrophically you screw up, you can always put things right, and you can always do better next time. The best GMs aren't the ones who don't make mistakes, the best GMs are the ones who learn from mistakes when they do make them. Maybe your first time will be smoother than mine, maybe it will be rougher. I don't know, and neither will you until you find out. What I do know is that sooner or later, your mettle will be tested. When everything goes to shit, will you unleash your ego and deny it? Will you wallow in shame and give up? Or will you carry on striving, fix your mistakes, and be better for it? There's only one way to find out. GMing is stressful and time-consuming and difficult to learn. Despite its challenge, or even because of it, it's absolutely 100% worth it. For all the long hours of world building and session prep, and all the trials and tribulations at the table, for all the disputes and dramas you'll have with your players, nothing is more rewarding. I love GMing. I mean, I made a whole YouTube channel about it, and I want you to love it just as much as I do. The RPG community needs you to love it. Truth is, we have a shortage of game masters out there. There are tens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of potential players out there, yearning to try RPGs but too scared to GM for themselves. All it takes is one person putting up an LFG ad somewhere, or mentioning their interest in RPGs in conversation, to give them the experience they crave. It takes one person to step up and take on the responsibility of GMing, to give 3, 4, 5 people a small slice of joy for a few hours every week. It only takes one person to plant the seeds of a story at the table, and then grow it into something truly enjoyable, truly memorable, truly incredible alongside their players. So, will that person be you? And it's a wrap. Thank you for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, then please like it, share it with your friends, and leave a comment down below. If you have any GM questions you'd like to ask me, go ahead and I'll answer them. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, then please subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. I'm hoping to keep up a weekly schedule from now until the end of the year, so do keep your eyes peeled for the next video. Now, this whole video idea came from one of my players asking me how to start GMing for his other friends, and so now I'm off to go bully him into actually taking the plunge. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and until I see you next, farewell.